I never imagined my wedding dress would become the battlefield. It had survived decades of dust and time, tucked neatly inside an acid-free preservation box, wrapped in tissue, sealed with lavender sachets. I kept it like a relic, not just because it was silk and lace, or because it was beautiful, but because it was the last thing my husband ever touched before he died. He passed away when our son, Daniel, was just 7. That dress was the only thing he insisted I preserve. Maybe one day, he'd said, someone will love our boy the way I loved you. Maybe she'll want to see it. I kept that dress not just for memories, but for hope. I pictured Daniel's future wife opening that box with soft reverence. I imagined sitting beside her, telling her stories about the rainy wedding day when that dress got its first and only stain. A wine spill from my husband's trembling hands during our first dance. But no one ever tells you how quickly dreams curdle. 2 weeks ago, I arrived at my son's home unannounced. I had just come from the dry cleaner, picking up some linens they forgot during their last visit. I used the spare key. Daniel had insisted I keep it in case of emergency. I thought that still meant something. But the moment I stepped into the guest room closet, I knew something was wrong. The box, my dress, it was gone. At first I panicked. I searched every corner, thinking maybe they'd moved it for space. Maybe they were rearranging. Maybe they'd stored it somewhere safer. I checked the attic. The basement, nothing. When I heard footsteps behind me, I turned. It was Kayla, my daughter-in-law. She was eating a granola bar, casually scrolling her phone. "Oh, that old thing?" she said when I asked. I threw it out. It was taking up space. And I mean, it was yellowing. My body didn't move. I stood there blinking, lips parted like I'd misheard. "You threw it out?" She shrugged. I didn't think it was a big deal. No one was ever going to wear it again. It was just there, just there, just... My voice cracked. "Kayla, that dress belonged to..." "I get it, I do," she cut me off, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "It's sentimental. But honestly, it was in the way, and we're trying to declutter." I couldn't even find my breath. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and yanked my wedding day straight out. She turned to leave like it was nothing, like she hadn't just shattered something sacred. Minutes later, Daniel came home. I waited. Surely he would see. He'd understand the weight of it. I told him what happened. His face barely shifted. "I mean, it's just a dress, Mom." He didn't say it cruelly. He said it like someone reading a weather report. No feeling, no apology, no recognition. "It's not a big deal," he repeated, rubbing the back of his neck. And that was the moment something inside me split, not with fury, not even sadness, just cold clarity, because it was a big deal. Not just because it was lace and silk, but because it was mine, because it represented the love he came from, because it was the last thing I had that still smelled like the day I was once everything to someone. They didn't just discard a dress, they discarded me. So I smiled, a small, cold smile. I walked to the door, set the dry cleaning bag on the floor, and turned to Daniel. "You're right," I said softly. "It's not a big deal." He looked relieved, thinking it meant I'd dropped it, that I was letting it go. But in that moment, I was only just picking something up all the years of quiet sacrifice, of gifts I'd handed over, without expectation, of traditions I tried to pass down that had been mocked or ignored. I walked out of that house knowing one thing for sure. If my wedding dress was just an old thing, then the rest of my heirlooms, they were about to become unreachable. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room, lights off, wrapped in an old shawl my grandmother knitted before arthritis stole her fingers. It still smelled faintly of rosemary and cedar. She used to say, "Women like us, when we give, it's with both hands and our whole heart, and sometimes that heart gets ignored." I finally understood what she meant. I kept staring at the empty space on my shelf where the photo of Daniel's wedding used to sit. I had taken it down after coming home without even realizing. It was instinct, a reflex. Like removing your hand from a hot stove, I thought back to everything I gave that boy. After my husband died, I didn't cry in front of Daniel. Not once. I swallowed grief like it was medicine, bitter but necessary. I got up every morning, packed his lunches with smiley-face napkins, and worked 14-hour days just to keep our roof from slipping. We didn't have much, but I made every birthday cake from scratch. I hand-sewed Halloween costumes. I went without so he could have name-brand shoes, tutoring, a prom tux, driving lessons. When college came, I emptied the last of my savings, and when that wasn't enough, I took a loan. I never asked him to. Pay it back. That was my choice. So he could focus on becoming someone, I told myself. Someone kind, someone grateful. When he got his first job, I framed the offer letter. When he proposed to Kayla, I gave him my mother's gold watch to wear on the wedding day. He didn't, but I told myself it was fine. He said he didn't want to ruin it. I gave Kayla a family cookbook passed down 5 generations, recipes with handwritten notes from women who lived through wars, loss, love, and too many quiet dinners. She smiled politely and said she'd just Google easier versions. Still, I gave. When they moved into their first apartment, I bought them their sofa, their fridge, half their kitchenware. I remember Kayla saying, "You don't have to," and I laughed it off. "I want to," I said, "but now I see it. Wanting to give doesn't mean others deserve to take." Daniel never meant to hurt me. That's what made it worse. He didn't even notice he had. I wasn't his mother anymore. I had become an old relic, like the dress. I thought about that night in the hospital, just after my husband died. I remember holding Daniel's tiny hand in mine and whispering, "It's just you and me now, sweetheart. And I'll never let you feel alone." I kept that promise. Even when he drifted. Even when Kayla rolled her eyes during holidays. Even when they stopped visiting on Mother's Day because brunch reservations were impossible. Even when I cried quietly in my car after being told their Thanksgiving was too tight this year. I never made it their problem because I thought love meant understanding, even when it hurt. But there was a difference between grace and letting yourself be erased. That wedding dress wasn't just silk and memory. It was proof. Proof that I once mattered deeply, that I was cherished, that there was a time I walked into a room and someone's face lit up. That mattered. And if it didn't matter to Daniel or Kayla, then I had to stop handing over my memories like loose change. That night, I walked to the hallway closet and opened the chest. My heirlooms, the delicate china I only used once a year. The silver spoon, set from my great-grandmother, wrapped in cloth. My father's war medal. A handwritten letter from my mother on the day I turned 30, tied in a blue ribbon. A music box that played the lullaby I used to sing to Daniel when he couldn't sleep. And the locket, my locket, the one with my wedding photo on one side and eyes a recorded message from my late husband on the other. I clicked it open. His voice cracked through the static. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. But know this, I loved you more than life. And I see how strong you are." I closed it and held it to my chest. They weren't going to touch these things. Not because I was angry, but because I was finally awake. I wasn't some bitter woman clutching old things. I was a mother, a wife, a daughter, and I wasn't going to leave pieces of myself lying around for people who thought they were just junk. Looking back, I realized the distance didn't begin with the dress. It started years ago, quiet, slow, like a leak behind the walls. You don't notice the damage until one day the paint peels back and everything rots underneath. The first time I met Kayla, I remember thinking she was beautiful, well-spoken, fashionable, the kind of girl Daniel always said intimidated him. He'd brought home sweet, soft-spoken women before. But Kayla was different, sharp, poised, a little cold. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. At the time, I told myself not to judge. I was just nervous. I wanted her to like me. I brought out my lemon bars, the ones Daniel used to beg for as a boy. She tried one bite, nodded, and set it down without a word. When I offered to wrap some for later, she smiled thinly and said, "We're trying to eat cleaner now, but thank you." That was the first chip. Later, when Daniel walked her to the car, I overheard her whisper, "She means well, but she's a little intense, don't you think?" I pretended I didn't hear. I chalked it up to nerves. But then came the small comments. Thanksgiving, she questioned every tradition. Do we really need to go around the table saying what we're grateful for? Stuffing from a box might be easier. Do we have to listen to this old jazz record again? Daniel laughed each time. He'd say, "It's not a big deal, Mom," or "She's just joking," or "Let's not make it awkward." So, I swallowed it. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was just adjusting. But I started noticing the patterns. Whenever I brought up memories of Daniel's childhood, she would roll her eyes. When I offered to help plan their wedding, she said, "They wanted a more modern vibe." When I suggested a family recipe for the rehearsal dinner, she said, "That feels more like a potluck thing." Even on the wedding day itself, something stung. I wasn't asked to help Kayla get ready. I watched from the corner while her mother fussed over her. When I approached with the antique lace handkerchief from my own wedding, Kayla took it but never carried it. I told myself it didn't matter. That what mattered was Daniel's happiness. But after the wedding, I stopped being included in things I used to be part of. Birthdays became texts. Phone calls shortened. Holidays became, "Just the two of us this year. We need time." Once, I called Daniel to ask if they'd like to come over for dinner. He said, "Let me check with Kayla." I never got a call back. I didn't push. I didn't pry, but I kept offering. I kept showing up. I kept trying, because that's what mothers do. But every visit became more uncomfortable. When I'd bring something, homemade jam, a scarf I knitted, hand towels with lace trim, Kayla would smile with her lips, not her eyes, and say, "Oh, thanks." I noticed how Daniel had started echoing her tone. When I mentioned visiting the farmer's market we used to love, he said, "We don't really do those things anymore." When I showed him a photo album I made, he flipped through it quickly and said, "Cool, cool," the same word he used to describe sneakers or weather. That's when I understood. I was becoming background noise. They'd begun to tolerate me. Not include me. But the final blow came on my birthday last year. I was alone. No call, no visit. At 6:42 p.m., I got a text. "Happy birthday. Hope it's a good one." From Daniel, no love you. No, sorry we couldn't make it. Just a message sent from a bathroom break or while waiting in a checkout line. I cried that night. Quietly, no one saw. But it wasn't about the forgotten cake or silence. It was about knowing. I was being shelved. They didn't want me. They wanted the idea of me. The convenient version, the gift giver, the babysitter in waiting, the woman who didn't ask for anything but gave everything. So when Kayla threw out my wedding dress, it wasn't the start of the betrayal. It was just the final, undeniable proof of what I'd known deep down for a while. I wasn't part of their family. I was a memory they were slowly trying to erase, but they forgot something. Memories, when discarded, don't disappear. Sometimes they come back sharper than ever. 2 days after I found out the dress was gone, I returned to their house, not unannounced this time. I called ahead and asked if I could stop by. Daniel hesitated for a moment but said, "Sure, Mom." I could hear Kayla in the background asking, "Why?" Like my presence was an inconvenience, like I was the stain they couldn't scrub out of their perfect white lives. I arrived with no makeup, no pleasantries, and no food offerings. No more cookies in tins, no more hand-sewn dish towels. Just me, holding nothing but the weight of what they took. Kayla was in the kitchen arranging flowers. She looked up and gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Hi," she said, voice clipped. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms folded, clearly uncomfortable. "I wanted to ask about the dress," I said calmly. Kayla sighed, like I'd brought up a bill they forgot to pay. "It was just sitting there for years," she said. "I mean, it was turning yellow and it honestly smelled a little weird. I thought you forgot it was even here." I didn't blink. "I didn't forget," she shrugged. "It's not like anyone was ever going to wear it again. It was just there. You could have called me," I said, quieter now, but firmer. "You could have asked," she laughed. "To be honest, I didn't think it was such a big deal." Daniel stepped in, his voice cautious. "Mom, it's just a dress. I know it had meaning for you, but it's not like she did it maliciously. Just a dress. Not maliciously." I had to grip the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. There was a time Daniel would have leapt to defend me, a time he would have wrapped his arms around me if I'd looked even remotely hurt. But now, he stood beside her. Calm, detached, like I was the one making a scene for mourning something they destroyed. "Daniel," I said, eyes locked on him. "That dress was the last thing your father touched before he died. Do you remember that?" His lips parted slightly, like he might say something. But he didn't. "It was the only piece of him I had left that still smelled like the night we danced," I said. "The only thing that reminded me of being loved that way, that deeply." Kayla shifted her weight. "I didn't know all that. You never said." "I didn't think I had to." She crossed her arms. "Well, it's not like we burned it. It's just gone." The word "gone" landed like an anvil in my chest. They didn't just toss fabric, they erased a chapter of my life because it was inconvenient, because it didn't fit their aesthetic, because they saw my memories as clutter. I looked at Daniel. "You know, I gave you that key because I trusted you," I said. "Because I believed this house, your home, would treat the things I love with care. You always told me I'd have a place here." He didn't deny it. He just exhaled and said, "I didn't think it had become this big of a thing." Big of a thing. Right. I stepped away from the counter, chest tight but head high. "You're right," I said. "It's not a big thing, not to you." They looked at me confused. I smiled, small, cold, quiet. But I realized something. They waited. If that dress wasn't sacred to you, if it was just an old thing you could throw away, then so are the rest of the things I gave you. Kayla's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means the heirlooms, the recipes, the jewelry, the letters, the things I've passed down or left here in good faith." Daniel straightened up. "Mom," I cut him off. "Don't worry, I won't cause a scene. I won't demand anything. I just wanted to thank you both for making it very clear where I stand." I turned to leave, and for once neither of them followed me. That silence was louder than any scream could have been. When I got to my car, I didn't cry. I didn't even tremble. Instead, I mentally made a list. A quiet, methodical inventory of every single thing I'd given them that they no longer deserved, and then I drove home, ready to take it all back. There's something sacred about a woman's keepsakes. They aren't just things. They're proof of a life lived, a love lost, a story remembered. The kind of proof no one asks for until it's already gone. When I got home that day, I didn't sit down. I didn't make tea. I didn't call anyone. I walked straight to the linen closet in the hallway, moved the folded towels, and unlocked the cabinet behind them. Inside sat the heart of my past, my heirlooms. A cedar box lined in blue velvet that had followed me from my childhood home, through my marriage, into widowhood, and now into this moment, where I finally saw it not as a treasure chest to pass down, but as something I had to protect. Inside were items most people would never glance at twice, but to me they were irreplaceable. the music box my mother gave me when I was 9. It plays Edelweiss, the same melody I used to hum when rocking Daniel to sleep after my husband died. The porcelain rosary beads my grandmother carried in the lining of her coat when she fled war-torn Poland. The recipe cards written in 3 different women's hands, mine, my mother's, and hers. Each note smudged from oil and time, each corner folded from love. I ran my hands gently over the lace veil tucked beside the box. My great-aunt's, worn in 1926. She eloped in secret with a man she wasn't supposed to love. She gave me that veil when I told her I was marrying for love, not for security. I never got to wear it, it was too fragile, but I kept it like it was spun gold. These weren't meant to be museum pieces. They were meant to be respected. I had once pictured passing the locket down to Kayla someday. Maybe when she became a mother. Or maybe when she finally understood how time wears down a woman, but how we still cling to beauty where we can find it. I thought maybe then she'd appreciate the history in my hands, but she threw out my wedding, dressed like trash, and that told me all I needed to know. I opened a smaller box inside the chest. This one held jewelry, not flashy, but meaningful. A brooch from my first job, a necklace my husband gave me after Daniel was born, and 2 rings. One was my mother's engagement ring, the other was mine. The one Kayla once jokingly said looked vintage, in a tone that wasn't flattering. I lifted the rings out, slipped them into a pouch, and set them aside. Then I pulled out the handwritten family tree I'd updated every year, calligraphy on parchment paper. Daniel's name used to be at the top of the 2nd page, linked with pride. I stared at it, then reached for a pen, and I drew a faint line through it. Not out of hate, out of clarity. Because what's the point of passing down history to someone who sees it as junk? What's the point of sharing your roots with someone who wants to dig them up and plant their own garden without you in it? I didn't act on impulse that night. I moved carefully, thoughtfully, like someone packing valuables before a hurricane. Gathered the quilt my mother had sewn with trembling hands in her last year of life, the one Kayla had once pushed aside at Christmas to make room for throw pillows from West Elm. I folded it neatly and placed it into a vacuum-sealed bag. I moved to my closet and took out a separate cedar chest, one they didn't know about. It held more delicate heirlooms, fragile photographs, love letters between my parents, and a single velvet pouch that contained my father's military ID and a pressed poppy from his funeral. None of it was going to sit in a home where it could be discarded like old magazines. Not anymore. By midnight, I had packed everything of meaning into 4 small crates. I labeled each with coded initials. I didn't cry. I didn't second guess. I simply protected what was mine. I wasn't doing this to punish anyone. I was doing this because I was done hoping they'd see my value through the lens of their convenience. They had made it clear they wanted a curated life, one without old things, one without uncomfortable emotion, one without inconvenient history. Fine, but history wasn't going to give them a choice. It was walking out the front door, with me. When you're a mother, people expect you to leave quietly, to age into invisibility. To smile through your own erasure, to be grateful for breadcrumbs, but I'd given them a feast, and they'd spit on the silverware. So, the next Sunday, I put on a soft blue sweater, the one Daniel said made me look gentle, and packed my trunk with every box I'd labeled. 4 crates, 1 locket, and 29 years of love they didn't recognize until it was out of their reach. I didn't text. I didn't call. I knew they'd be out. Kayla's social calendar was easy to track. Her Instagram told me everything: brunch, pedicures, a couple's massage. The kind of life she built piece by piece, with no space for what didn't photograph well. Especially not a mother-in-law with roots instead of rings. I still had the spare key. Daniel gave it to me after the wedding. For emergencies. Turns out, being betrayed by your only child is exactly that. Their front door opened smoothly. Their house was quiet, too quiet. the kind of cold silence that never existed in the home Daniel grew up in. My house always smelled like stew, or cinnamon or laundry. This one smelled like lavender soap and silence. I walked to the guest room, the one where my wedding dress used to sit in the closet, quietly waiting for a moment that never came. The closet was empty now, repurposed for seasonal shoes. I stared at the row of designer boxes and wondered if Kayla even remembered the sound of crinoline shifting in its box. Probably not. I moved quickly. I went room by room, silently gathering anything I had given them that held meaning. The silver candlesticks I passed down from my mother into the crate. The framed wedding photo of Daniel and Kayla that I had gifted them, I left that. But the one with the handwritten note from my husband on the back, gone. The hand-stitched pillowcases I embroidered with their initials, folded, packed, and replaced with plain white ones from the linen closet. In their living room, I saw the shelf where my family Bible used to sit, now replaced by modern decor and a glass sculpture shaped like nothing. I didn't find the Bible. That one was gone, too, just like the dress. But what they hadn't noticed was that I'd never given them everything. I had always kept the heart of it at my house, just in case. Maybe that was intuition. Maybe that was the voice of a woman who had buried a husband and raised a son alone, and knew better than to bet everything on anyone but herself. When I reached the kitchen, I opened the drawer where my recipes used to sit in a box labeled Mom's Cooking. It was gone. In its place was a sleek bamboo organizer with meal delivery menus, the kind that arrives with step-by-step instructions and no memories. I smiled sadly. Then I opened a high cupboard and found it. The only thing Kayla hadn't thrown out because she hadn't bothered to look that high. My mother's handwritten recipe for cinnamon apple jam. A note scrawled in the corner. For when life tastes too bitter. I folded it slowly, kissed the edge, and slid it into my purse. That was the final thing. By the time I locked the door behind me, I hadn't left. A single fingerprint behind. No note. No confrontation. Just absence, the kind that echoes louder than any goodbye. As I drove home, the boxes gently shifted in the trunk. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I felt peace. The kind that comes when you realize you don't need permission to protect yourself. You don't need their apology to reclaim what's sacred. When I reached my house, I unpacked each item with care. I didn't put them back in storage. I displayed them. I turned my home into a museum of the women who came before me. My grandmother's rosary beads hung beside the locket. My great-aunt's veil was pressed into a shadow box. The music box sat on my coffee table next to a photo of my wedding day. I even started a small handwritten journal, one entry per heirloom, telling its story, its meaning, its place in the chain. I realized something as I wrote. These heirlooms. They weren't meant to sit in silence. They were meant to be honored, and now they finally would be. It took 3 days. 3 days of silence before the phone rang. I was folding laundry, towels still warm from the dryer, when I saw Daniel's name flash across the screen. My stomach didn't drop. My hands didn't shake. That version of me, the one who would have run to answer, breathless with hope, was gone. I let it ring until the final second, then answered with a calm, "Hello?" His voice was sharp, urgent. "Mom, did you come by the house?" I didn't say anything right away. Let him sit in it. "Because we noticed some things are missing. Did you take them?" I folded another towel. "Yes." Wait, what?" I said, "Yes, Daniel." I took back what was mine. There was a pause, a long, stunned silence on his end. Then, "Why would you do that? Kayla's freaking out." I laughed softly, not bitter, not loud, just tired. "She's freaking out because a few pillows. And old dishes are missing?" "No," he said, stumbling. Because the candlesticks are gone, and the recipes. And that stupid blanket she liked to keep on the couch. You can't just take things without telling us. I pressed the phone closer. Funny, that's exactly what happened to my wedding dress. Silence. You didn't even tell me, I said. You let her throw away the most personal thing I owned, Daniel. The one thing that still smelled like your father. The one thing I preserved longer than my own hope. And you said, it's not a big deal. His voice lowered. I didn't mean it like that, no? I asked. Then how did you mean it? I didn't think it would matter so much. There it was. That sentence. I didn't think, because I'd made it so easy not to. I'd built my love like scaffolding, always there to hold them up. Always behind the scenes. Always disposable. It mattered, Daniel, I said softly. More than you'll ever understand. And you made it clear how little that mattered to you both. But these things, Mom, the candlesticks, the quilt, that stuff wasn't even about the dress. It's exactly about the dress, I replied. The dress was the line, and once it was crossed, I realized everything else was up for grabs. He was quiet again. I imagined him pacing, hand in his hair the way he used to do when he was 10 and trying to lie about something. Kayla thinks you're being spiteful, he finally muttered. She would, I said. She doesn't know the difference between boundaries and bitterness. But you do. I let that settle in. Then I added, and if you're calling to ask for those things back, don't bother. But some of those were wedding gifts. They were mine to give, I interrupted. And now, they're mine to reclaim. You lost the right to those things the moment you looked at me and said, it's not a big deal. His breath caught, like he wanted to fight but didn't know how. I softened, just a little. Daniel, I love you. I always will. But love without respect? That's charity. And I'm done handing out pieces of myself to people who think they're trash. Was quiet. Then, is this it? You're cutting us off? I sighed. No, I'm not cutting you off. I'm giving you space. Space for what? To decide who you want to be, I said. A man who honors where he came from, or one who throws it out when it no longer matches his life. He didn't respond. So I added, but just so you know, next time you come looking for history, for comfort, for connection, you won't find it in that house. I hung up before he could speak, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had drawn a line around my heart, not to wall it in, but to keep it from being walked over again. I stood at the window afterward, watching the wind sway the oak tree outside. The same tree Daniel used to climb when he was little, legs swinging, shouting, "Mom, watch me!" I always did. But now I was watching something else. A mother remembering that watching doesn't mean waiting, and loving doesn't mean being silent. I didn't tell anyone what I had done, but word has a way of traveling, especially when it's soaked in family politics and served at Sunday brunch. By the end of the week, my phone lit up with calls from people who hadn't spoken to me in months, cousins, aunts, even my older sister Denise, who lived 3 states away and only called when someone died or got married. The first call came from my niece Olivia. "Auntie," she said gently, "did you really go to Daniel's and take everything back?" I paused. I took back what was mine. There was a beat of silence. Then she whispered, "Good." But not everyone felt the same. Later that evening, Denise called. No greeting, just, "What in God's name are you doing?" I sat on my porch, sipping tea, staring at the stars. Taking care of myself. "You're making a spectacle," she said. "They're your family." "And families should treat each other with care," I replied calmly. "Do you want to hear what happened, or have you already picked a side?" Sighed. "Daniel said you overreacted about a dress." I closed my eyes. Of course, that's how it was being framed. A dress. Not a life, not a story, not a symbol, just a dress. I told her everything, about the erasure, the disrespect, the way they discarded what I held sacred. And when I finished, Denise said, "Okay, I understand why you were hurt, but maybe you should have talked to them first, before taking things. I let out a short breath. Denise, I did talk to them, and they said it wasn't a big deal. The worst part about being hurt by family is how quickly they expect you to heal. How fast they want you to forget. How uncomfortable they get when you don't sweep it under the rug for the sake of peace. But peace without truth is just performance. Soon, other relatives started weighing in. My cousin Lara texted, "You should have just forgiven her. Young people make mistakes." My response, "She's not 12. She's a grown woman with a recycling bin full of my history." Some even said I should apologize for making Daniel choose between his wife and his mother. I never asked him to choose, he chose. When he stood silently in that kitchen and let Kayla dismiss what mattered to me. But not everyone was against me. My friend Marcia, who's known me since Daniel was in diapers, dropped by with a pie and a knowing look. "I heard the story," she said. "And let me just say, you should have taken the blender too." We laughed. For the first time in weeks, I actually laughed. "I'm serious," she said, nudging me. "You've bent over backward your whole life. And for what? To be treated like some afterthought in your own legacy?" I sipped my tea. "I just didn't think it would be him." She nodded. "It's always the ones we never think." We sat in silence for a while before she added, "You know what hurts the most? When people you poured your soul into act like you're too much when you finally ask to be seen." I looked at her then, and we both knew. She wasn't just talking about me. It's a pain shared by every woman who's mothered, someone who turned around and said, "That wasn't enough." And the sad thing is, I never did it for recognition. I did it out of love. But even love needs a return path. Even love has a limit when it's being bled dry. The next day, Daniel texted. No words, just a photo. The kitchen table I gave them, empty. No candle holders, no quilt. I stared at the image for a long time, then set my phone down. He wasn't reaching out to connect. He was trying to make me feel guilty, trying to show me what was missing, as if I hadn't spent the last few decades watching myself vanish piece by piece. But I didn't reply, because I finally understood that silence can be a sentence. Let them sit in the echo. Let them taste the absence, because maybe then, just maybe, they'd learn the difference between having someone and honoring them. It came in the form of a text, like everything did now. Daniel. "Hey Mom, we're having a small dinner Sunday. Just close family. Thought maybe you'd want to come." No apology, no acknowledgement, just an invitation dressed in politeness, like bandaging a wound without cleaning it first. I stared at the message for several minutes, long enough for the tea in my cup to grow cold. A month had passed since I reclaimed my heirlooms. A month of quiet. A month of reflection. A month without Daniel. And now suddenly a dinner? I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't about reconciliation. It was damage. Control. Someone, maybe a relative, maybe a friend, had told them how the family was talking. How people were whispering about what Kayla did, about what Daniel didn't do, about what I did in response. This dinner wasn't a warm embrace, it was an optics correction. But still, I said yes, not because I missed them, though I did, deeply. Not because I wanted things to go back to how they were, because they couldn't, but because I had one final thing to say, and I wanted them to hear it without distraction. Face to face, forks down, wine glasses trembling. Sunday came fast. Wore charcoal gray, not mourning, but not celebration either. A quiet storm of a color. Around my neck, I wore the locket. My husband's voice tucked gently against my chest. When I arrived at their home, everything looked curated. Candles lit, jazz playing. Kayla in a flowy beige dress, her makeup perfectly soft. She smiled, like none of it had happened. "Hi, come in. Dinner's almost ready." Daniel appeared behind her, hands in his pockets, a boy again in the face of consequence. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice low. I nodded. "Daniel." They led me to the table, new placemats, sparkling cutlery, and a centerpiece of lilies, my favorite, which Kayla always said made her sneeze. There were 6 others there, relatives, a neighbor, someone's cousin. All polite, all walking on eggshells. I made small talk, ate in silence, let Kayla refill my glass 3 times while avoiding my eyes. I waited until dessert, when the table was full, the room soft with wine and conversation. And then I stood, tapped my spoon, gently against my glass. The room hushed. Kayla smiled nervously. "Oh, are we doing toasts?" I smiled back warmly. "I suppose we are." I looked around the table, paused, then reached into my purse and pulled out a small velvet box. "I brought something," I said. "A keepsake, something old, something I once intended to pass down to the next woman who joined our family." Kayla blinked, visibly stiffening. I opened the box slowly, revealing my mother's engagement ring, gasps from a few at the table. The ring sparkled under the candlelight, its modest stone carrying more weight than diamonds ever could. "I was saving this," I said, voice steady, "for someone who understood the meaning of family, of memory, of legacy." I looked at Kayla, but I realized I was wrong. Her eyes flickered. I turned to my left, toward Olivia, my niece, the same one who'd called me first, the same one who used to ask about every trinket in my curio cabinet when she was little. The same one who, just last year, cried while reading my mother's cookbook after a miscarriage, saying she wanted to feel connected to the women who survived harder things. I slid the box toward her. "Olivia," I said, "you always listened when I talked about our family. You asked questions. You cared." Her hand shook as she picked it up. Tears welled in her eyes. The table went silent. Kayla's fork clinked against her plate. Daniel's face hardened. "Mom, come on!" I turned to him. "No, Daniel. This time you listen. I preserved that dress for 35 years. Your father helped me box it. It was the one thing I kept whole after he died. I never asked for anything from you, Daniel. I gave and gave. And when I was hurt, you told me it wasn't a big deal." The room stayed still. You didn't just throw out a dress. You threw out the bridge between who I was and who I became. And you let her do it. Kayla sat frozen, eyes wide but dry. I turned to the others. "You don't have to understand why I took the heirlooms back. You don't have to agree, but you will respect this, because I will not be edited out of my own story for anyone's comfort." Then I sat. The air buzzed with discomfort, but I felt still. Daniel didn't speak. Kayla didn't meet my gaze. But Olivia reached over and touched my hand, lightly, firmly. That was all the confirmation I needed. I didn't come for revenge. Came for recognition, and whether they knew it or not, I had just reclaimed it. The room was quiet for a long moment after I sat down. You could hear the clink of a spoon as someone stirred their untouched coffee. A chair creaked as someone shifted, uneasy. Even the background music, light jazz humming softly, sounded suddenly too loud. But no one said a word. Daniel didn't look at me. He stared down at his plate like it could offer him an escape route. Kayla's cheeks were red, but she kept her back straight, her expression frozen, somewhere between forced dignity and disbelief. I could see her jaw working as she clenched her teeth, her eyes flicking toward the velvet ring box in Olivia's hands. She hadn't touched her dessert, and then, finally, she spoke. In a brittle voice, she said, "So that's what this was? You came here to humiliate us? To hand out your inheritance in front of everyone like a show?" I looked at her, calm and unmoved. "No, Kayla. I came to remind you that some things aren't yours to throw away. Not dresses, not stories, not people." She scoffed, crossed her arms. "It's just stuff. Heirlooms, recipes, old rings. Why does any of it matter this much? I could have let it go. I could have stood up and left. But something inside me, the part that had been silent for too long, rose to the surface. I picked up my glass. Then let's talk about what matters, I said, voice steady but full of the ache I'd buried for too long. I stood again. This time not for a performance, but for truth. What matters, Kayla, is knowing the value of something that was given with love. What matters is respecting history, even if it doesn't match your decor. What matters is not pretending to be family only when it's convenient. I turned toward Daniel. What matters is remembering who held your hand when you buried your father, who stayed up with you through fevers, heartaches, and your first rejection letter, who saved every drawing, every card, every note, because it came from you. His eyes met mine, finally, and for the first time in years, he looked like my son again. What matters, I said, my voice catching slightly, is never letting someone you love feel like a burden, like a relic, like an afterthought. The table stayed silent. Then Olivia stood. She held the velvet ring box against her chest, tears streaking her cheeks. I'll honor it, she said softly. I promise. I gave her a quiet nod, my throat tight, and then I turned back to the room. You may not understand what I did. You don't have to, but I know one thing for sure. When I leave this world, I want the people holding my story to be the ones who listened when I was still around to tell it. I sat back down. Kayla didn't speak again. Her lips were pressed into a line, her eyes distant. Daniel stared at his hands. Someone coughed. Another cleared their throat. And slowly, conversations started to rise again. Awkward, fragmented, desperate to move on. But I didn't need to be part of them. I had said what needed to be said. I didn't need applause. I didn't need validation. Had spoken for myself, for once. Later, as guests filtered out with polite hugs and mumbled goodbyes, Daniel walked me to the door. He hesitated. You really meant it, didn't you? I turned to him. I always mean what I don't say first. He looked down. I miss you, he whispered. My eyes welled, but I didn't let the tears fall. I miss who we were, I replied. But I don't miss being ignored. He nodded slowly. I don't know how to fix it. Then start by not pretending it's not broken. I didn't wait for a promise. I didn't wait for the perfect ending. I simply opened the door, stepped out, into the night, and walked to my car. Because I wasn't waiting to be chosen anymore. The next morning I woke up early. The kind of early that comes not from obligation or worry, but clarity. For the first time in a long while, my chest didn't ache from invisible bruises. The air felt lighter. Even the silence in my house felt sacred, not empty. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and opened the curtains wide. Sunlight spilled across the floor, brushing the cedar box in the corner like an old friend saying, "See? You remembered yourself." After the dinner, I knew there was no going back to the way things had been. Not because I didn't want to rebuild something with Daniel, but because whatever we built now would have to be honest. Equal, not a shrine to a son who forgot, but a space for people who remembered. That day, I took out a fresh notebook. A new heirloom in progress. On the first page, I wrote in thick black ink, "For the one who listens." Then I turned to the shelf and began to gather the items I had reclaimed. Slowly, carefully, like a curator arranging an exhibit. I opened the locket and let my late husband's voice fill the room again. I played the music box, humming along. I unfolded the quilt and laid it across my bed. Everything I had protected now had a place, not hidden, not boxed away, but honored. And I thought of Olivia, the way her hands had trembled as she took the ring, the way her eyes had filled with tears without embarrassment, the way she'd held my hand, silently saying thank you with every squeeze. A week after the dinner, she came to visit. She brought flowers, wild and imperfect, and a lemon tart she had baked from one of the recipes I gave her months ago before all this started. "I wasn't sure if you'd want company," she said, stepping into the house like someone entering a cathedral. "I always want your company," I said, and I meant it. We sat in the living room, the scent of lemon and sugar hanging in the air, and she pulled out the ring box again. "I haven't worn it yet," she whispered. "It feels too important." "It is," I said. "But it's yours. Now, because you see the weight in things other people call clutter. You hear the voices behind the dust." She looked at me, eyes glassy. "I used to think heirlooms were just stuff," she admitted, "until I got older, until I saw how people treat what women leave behind." I reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, like I used to do for Daniel. "They're not just things," I said. "They're the fingerprints of women who survived, who loved, who gave too much. They're everything we weren't allowed to say out loud." She nodded, then whispered, "I'll protect them." And I believed her. In that moment, I didn't feel like I had lost a son. I felt like I had passed a torch. Olivia didn't share my bloodline directly. She wasn't next in line in some traditional sense. But family isn't defined by who shares your name or sits at your holiday table. Out of obligation. It's defined by who sees you, who values what you value, without needing it to shine. That afternoon, I gave Olivia a journal. The same one I'd started earlier that week. Inside were stories, photos, recipes, lessons I learned the hard way, letters to the future, and on the inside cover I wrote, "To the one who will never throw away my history." She cried when she read it. So did I. And for once, the tears weren't from grief or anger. They were from release, because I finally understood. You don't need to force your legacy onto the unwilling. You just need to place it in the right hands, and those hands don't always belong to the people you raised. Sometimes they belong to the ones who choose to hold you close, no matter how inconvenient your love may be. I didn't plan to see Daniel and Kayla again so soon. But life has a funny way of placing you in front of the very people who taught you how to stand up straighter. It was at a baby shower, not theirs. Kayla still made it known she wasn't ready for children. It was for my cousin's daughter, hosted at a shared family space we'd all used over the years. And when I walked in, gift in hand, head held high, I saw them immediately. Daniel's back stiffened when he noticed me. Kayla blinked, then gave a smile so tight it could have cracked her foundation. I nodded politely and made my way toward the gift table. Olivia was already there, placing down a hand-wrapped box with a ribbon folded into the shape of a rose. She turned, saw me, and grinned like she'd been waiting for me to arrive. We sat together, whispered jokes during the awkward games, laughed at the toddler who kept stealing cake pops, and then, just before the toasts, I excused myself and walked to the restroom. As I stepped out, Kayla was there, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, waiting. "Can we talk?" she asked. I didn't flinch. "We're talking now." She shifted uncomfortably, chewing the inside of her cheek. "I didn't mean to hurt you. With the dress, I didn't understand what it meant." "You didn't ask," I replied. She nodded slowly. "You're right. I didn't." There was a moment of silence. Then she said, "Daniel's been quiet, distant. He won't talk about that night. He's not the same." I looked her dead in the eye. "Neither am I." She swallowed. "I didn't think it would matter that much." "And that," I said, voice even, "is the root of it all. You didn't think. You didn't ask. You didn't care. And Daniel let you. That silence, that dismissal, that's what changed everything. Not the dress." She nodded again. But this time, it looked like the weight had finally registered. "I'm not asking for the heirlooms," she added quickly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't say thank you. I didn't offer forgiveness, because sometimes the apology is the end, not the bridge." "I hope," I said slowly, that if you ever become a mother, you'll remember this moment, and that you'll never allow someone to treat your memories like trash, because it's not just about items, Kayla. It's about worth. She nodded, blinking fast, clearly trying not to cry in a public hallway. I should get back, I said, stepping past her. As I returned to the main room, I saw Daniel across the table. He stood when I approached, like instinct, like habit, or maybe guilt. We looked at each other for a long time. Neither of us smiled. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I waited. He lowered his gaze, and that was enough. I didn't need him to beg. I didn't need some grand apology. I had already claimed what was mine, the truth, the voice I buried for too long, the power of choosing myself. I picked up my bag, leaned into Olivia, and whispered, "I think I'll head out." "You okay?" she asked, standing with me. Smiled, genuinely. More than okay. As I walked across the room, I felt the hush, the whispers, the shifting eyes. Let them talk, let them wonder, because sometimes the loudest statement a woman can make is the sound of her heels walking away from people who took her for granted. When I stepped outside, the sun hit my face with a warmth that felt earned, not given, not begged for, earned. And with every step I took, I felt the weight of generations. Behind me, women who stayed quiet, who swallowed disrespect, who passed down strength in secret, but not anymore, because I was walking out, not just for myself, but for them. There's a strange silence that follows a reckoning. It isn't loud or bitter. It's not the slam of a door or the sting of final words. It's softer than that, like the way a house sounds after everyone leaves, like breath, like freedom. After the baby shower, I went home and didn't cry. I didn't replay every word. I didn't wonder what I could have done differently. I didn't pace the floor hoping Daniel would call or Kayla would show up with flowers and a second chance speech, because I had already mourned the version of myself who waited to be chosen. What remained now was peace, not the kind you stumble into, the kind you earn, the kind you build, layer by layer, truth by truth, after tearing down every lie that told you to stay silent. The truth is, my son betrayed me in silence. His wife discarded me in convenience, and my heart, after decades of giving and giving, had finally said, enough. But not all endings are losses. I didn't lose everything. In fact, I gained more than I ever expected. Olivia came over every Sunday. After that, she brought jam jars and recipe cards, questions and stories. She helped me polish the silver, label the photos, update the family tree. We created something together, a legacy of memory that would never be boxed away again. She began calling it our inheritance journal. And one evening, after we made my mother's pot roast and laughed over how terrible it smelled before it finally bloomed into flavor, she looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "You taught me how to carry people," she said. "How to hold them when they're no longer here. I think that's the greatest thing you've ever passed down." I sat with that because I realized she wasn't talking about things, not jewelry, not lace, not letters. She was talking about love, the real kind, the kind that doesn't come with strings or guilt or silence, the kind that survives even when a wedding dress doesn't. And Daniel? He still hasn't apologized, but he did send me a message a few weeks later. Just 2 words. "I'm trying." It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was something. A spark. A step. I haven't decided if I'll meet him halfway, because healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means no longer bleeding when someone says your name. Sometimes it means knowing you're whole, with or without them. And Kayla? I heard she told her sister that family heirlooms matter more than she thought. That's not redemption. But maybe it's growth. And me? I've changed. I planted a garden behind my house, each row named for a woman in my bloodline. My mother, my grandmother, my great-aunt, and now, Olivia. Rows of lavender, rosemary, and wild daisies. Flowers that grow strong in unlikely soil. I started writing letters, not just to Olivia, but to my future great-granddaughter. To the woman I may never meet. To the girl who might one day wonder where she came from and who stood before her. And I tell her, you are not too much. You are not an afterthought. Your stories matter, your memories deserve honor, and if they ever try to reduce you to silence, you rise, you speak, you walk away, not in shame, but in power. Because I've learned that sometimes walking away is the most sacred act of self-respect a woman can choose. And when I did, I didn't just take back heirlooms, I took back myself. My wedding dress is gone, but I'm still here. And now I wear peace, stitched with every thread of the woman I forgot I was allowed to be.